to have you here again today, and we'll pass things off to Susan Barger from the FAIC. Go ahead, Susan.
Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you here today. I have a few slides to go over just what is happening. If you need to reset your course password, use this info@culturalheritage.org address. If you have a problem about course mechanics, you can contact me, and my email is c2cc@culturalheritage.org. If you have questions about the course content, use the discussion tab on the course website and post them there. And I'm going to talk a little bit. If you're aiming to get the Credly badge, you need to listen to all the webinars. You can listen to them live or in person, and you need to complete all the assignments. And so the handouts are under the handout tab. The discussions are under the discussion tab. This always gives the time that the live webinars start. They're always at an Eastern Daylight Time. And once the recording has been posted, you'll see View Online Recording, so you can get that there. And okay, so when you submit an assignment, you go to the assignment and you press the Submit Files, and you will get a week 2 or whatever it is, you'll get a pop-up. The file size has to be under 5 megabytes, so that may mean that you have to open up. If you're submitting a PDF, you may have to open the PDF and do a Save As Reduced Size PDF. And you can upload them there, and you can submit any of these file forms down here, and then hit Submit. And there will be a note here. See where the screen, let's see if I can get this again. This says that you can have 4 files here to pass, but we're going to redo these so that they now just require 1 file to pass. So Simon will talk about that. If you want to keep informed about C2C Care, the old listserv C2C Announce is going away the middle of March. So you need to join the Connecting to Collections Care community, which is also where we have discussions and answer questions about caring for collections in small and mid-sized cultural institutions. So you can find the instructions for joining that on our website at this web address. And you can always keep up with us on social media, Facebook and Twitter. And for people that are affected by emergencies, this is in the U.S., this is the 24-hour hotline for emergency national heritage responders. So I think that's it. I know there was a problem with people who did not get a pass even though they submitted their materials. We're working on that, so don't worry about that. And for people who don't have a collection, you can either use an imaginary collection that you make up to do the assignments, or you can use a collection that you used to work for. So we'll now turn this over to Simon. So Simon, take over. Thank you. And remember, I'll be collecting your questions and putting them over so that we can answer them at the end. There's a handout, and the assignment are right below the chat box, so you can download those. They're also on the website for the education thing. So here we go. Simon,
hello, everyone. Okay, thank you. So welcome to webinar 2. My name is Simon Lambert. I'm a preservation advisor for the Canadian Conservation Institute in Ottawa, Canada. So the topic for this week's webinar is the reorg condition report and also maximizing storage space, because I know that that is an issue that a lot of museums are facing. And so we thought that it would be useful to highlight specifically some strategies for that issue. Just as a reminder, the course objective is that by the end of webinar 6, you will have developed a basic reorg plan to improve collections access and care in one of your storage rooms. If you are an educator or if you are an advisor, then as Susan said, you might not have a collection that you're working with at the moment, but you will have an understanding of how a plan could be developed. So the second webinar, the objective for it, what you can expect at the end of this hour, is following a series of examples and exercises. You will recognize 2 different approaches in tackling the storage condition report, and identify practical ways to optimize storage space by regrouping objects of similar size and by using floor space more efficiently. So without further ado, let's begin. I just want to remind everyone that all the materials that we're talking about today and throughout the 6 webinars are available online on the ECROM website in English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese at the moment. And the materials were developed through a collaboration between UNESCO and ECROM and have been adapted for distance learning thanks to a special collaboration with us, the Canadian Conservation Institute. So just to recap what we did last week, I won't go too much into detail, but we did look at 2 different case studies, one from Canada, one from Belgium, showing 2 projects of very different scales. But they had one thing in common. They were a workshop organized with a lot of different people working at the same time in a very limited time frame, which may be different from the situation that you will be facing in your own institution. But it kind of gives an idea of how many hours can be required to undertake such a project. And then we then asked you as the first assignment to complete the reorg self-evaluation. I'd just like to start the first poll, if we could. Okay, so this, unfortunately, we were wanting to do this last time, but we forgot to start the poll. And so this is just the 10 criteria for functional storage. And I'd just like for you to take 30 seconds to go through this list, or a minute, and just click on all the criteria that you currently meet in your storage area that you're working with or thinking of when you're taking this course. I think the poll will stay on as I continue talking, so if you haven't finished, then just feel free to just continue clicking. I just want to go over the self-evaluation. We did get a question at the end of last webinar that asked, how can I represent various storage, let's say my institution has various storage areas, how can I represent the results for various storage areas? So I'm just showing you here. I know that the question was probably not necessarily related to the visual representation of the results, but this is a way that some participants that had multiple storage areas represented the results. So you'll see that there's kind of 4 sections where you see management, 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 management repeated for 4 different areas, and you have above each of the components, so management, you have 2 different bars. So one is the before, one is the after. So that's a way of representing the situation across one institution in 4 different storage areas. Those of you who have done the self-evaluation will realize that some of the questions in there really apply to the whole institution and not only to a specific room. But then there are those questions that relate to the specific conditions in that room. So as I mentioned at the end of last webinar, it's not really possible to kind of do an average of the scores and get a really good representation of what's going on in that institution. So it's kind of useful to really still kind of have an evaluation for each different storage room, because the situation might be very different in your basement storage, in your attic storage, or in your purpose-designed collection storage area. So the situation might be very different. So it's nice to represent that variety. Okay, so I think we can close the poll probably. One thing I want to mention is the Reorg Angels Project 2019, which is organized around the American Institute of Conservation's 47th annual meeting. So we're doing an Angels Project, which is basically a one-day reorg implementation. And it's going to be for the delegates who are attending the AIC conference this year. So it's an event where you can volunteer your time to assist a smaller institution in reorganizing their storage. It's happening on May 13th from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So this is for those who are attending today. This webcast, who might be going to the AIC conference. Just know that there will be a possibility for you to practice some of the things that we're talking about if you attend this Angels project. It's not required to do this to pass this course, but it's just an opportunity if you happen to be in New England, in Connecticut, in May. So for more information, I included the link there, which is quite a long URL. But basically, to volunteer for the project, you have to email your CV to Ruth Saylor, and this is the email there that you have to send it to. So just something that you should keep in mind if you're going to the conference, but by no means is it required for this course. Now, related to our second assignment for last week, we had, I asked you about a project that you would like to undertake once your collections are reorganized. And I just want to let you know that there is a project coming soon, which is an international collaboration between a bunch of organizations from around the world, including ICROM, Kikirpa, which is Marjoleine's institution, different ICOM national committees or regional committees, partners also in Serbia at the Central Institute for Conservation in Belgrade, us at the Canadian Conservation Institute, and partners in Greece, an organization in Greece, Diadrasis, who will be partnering with us as well. And this project will be implemented with the support of BELSPO, which is the Belgian Federal Science Policy Office. And the aim of this project is to stimulate innovation by encouraging museums to develop projects and activities that will focus on using their collections to benefit the public. So basically, this project is going to be targeting those who have implemented reorgs in their institutions, who now have access to their collections, and who have some great innovative ideas on how they can now use their collections. So it's really related to that second question I asked. So keep monitoring the Reorg International Facebook page or the ICROM Facebook page for more information on this project that will be coming soon. So just to give you some examples of the things that we've seen in the past few years, these kinds of projects featuring collections that are now accessible to the public, I just wanted to highlight a few that were particularly interesting. This is an art gallery in New Brunswick, Canada, and they had to basically empty all of their vaults into their display area because they didn't have a swing space. And so basically they had to close one of their galleries to be able to empty all their collections. And they used this as an opportunity to organize some workshops on artwork documentation. They invited some artists who created works inspired by the collection that was temporarily stored in the galleries. So we have different artists working on projects. So I thought that was very neat. There's another example that I want to talk about, which is from the West Parry Sound District Museum in Ontario, Canada. And what they ended up with was, when they did their reorg, they ended up with 400 found in collection artifacts. So artifacts that didn't have a status, no documentation attached to it, no registration or accession records. And so 400 artifacts out of about 10,000 in their collection. So it's a significant amount. And they had to find a place for them because there was no room, there was no temporary location where they could store them. So what did they do? They created an exhibition called Look What We Found, and they invited members from the community to identify some of these things. So some of them may have been from donated by members of that community in the past, or they may have been displayed somewhere that someone was familiar with. So they really engaged their community by kind of trying to identify crowdsourcing collections documentation to find out a little bit more about those objects for which they had absolutely no records. There was a project also around one of the reorg international activities in India. So after the reorg project, there were some objects that were uncovered that were not accessible previously, and so the workshop organizers decided to invite school children and had a drawing competition. And the winners of the competition were then invited for a private behind-the-scenes tour of the storage. So you can see some of the creations there from the students that submitted their drawings. So this was kind of a nice way of those school groups. Another example here from Collingwood Museum in Ontario, Canada. So they also did not have a swing space available to empty their collection room, and so they had to use one of their galleries. And so they cordoned off, so they blocked off one of the galleries, so the public could not enter, but the public could see all the collections that were temporarily being stored there. So they used it as a kind of visible swing space or visible display, and used that as an opportunity to educate the public about what goes on behind the scenes and the kind of work that goes into managing a collection. And then they also organized some storage tours and and used Facebook as well to highlight some of the objects that they weren't sure about or that they didn't have any documentation about. And one example is in the lower left side here. This object was featured on Facebook, and the people who are in the photo recognized the object from the Facebook group, and they said, oh, this belonged to one of my family members, and this was this store that used to be here. So they were able to actually get more information about their collection by involving the public. And here on the right side, this group here, this man saw this object in one of the storage tours and was able to identify what the use of that object was, which was previously unknown or undocumented. So that's kind of a nice feel-good story for that. So this brings us now to the condition report, which is phase 2. So the point of the condition report really is to document the current state of the storage. Just like you would do a condition report if you're attempting or you're preparing to engage in a conservation treatment of an object, you do the same thing for storage before intervening. And so the goal is to document the current state and also identify the major issues that are affecting collections in that space. So I'm going to talk about two options that I mentioned initially in the kind of the course objectives. So I'm going to talk about two different ways that you could go about doing a condition report. For this course, which is an online course where we do not have a lot of contact time, I'm going to suggest that you do the light version. And I can hear all the sighs of relief from everyone. So, but I will start with the in-depth version just to give you an idea of what it might imply if you decide to use the reorg workbook. So if you're using the reorg workbook, you will probably be filling out a bunch of worksheets that have been designed to collect information about the storage area and to help you make a diagnosis. So one of the first worksheets you would be working on is worksheet number 3, which is focusing on the building. And this, the goal of this worksheet is to identify what the major issues are with your building, and that could be part of your reorg project. obviously we're not going to be looking at, it's not a detailed building condition survey, but it's kind of identifying those major things that could be affecting your collection and that can feasibly be resolved within a reorg project. So it's not building a new facility, it's not undergoing like a major renovation, but it's addressing those risks that might be easier to tackle within this kind of project. Worksheet number 4 focuses on storage furniture and space usage. So what you'll be answering if you fill out this form is how much storage surface do I have by unit type? So how many square meters or square feet of storage space do I have available in my storage area? How well am I using that surface, that storage surface? So is it overfull? Is it underfull? Is it just full? So what percentage of fullness are you using that space? And how much more storage surface do I need? So if I'm currently using more than 100% of my storage surface, then how many units does that represent that I need to add into my space? So those are the kinds of issues that you would be working on if you used Worksheet 4. 5 focuses on the administration and management framework. So here you're trying to look at which key policies and procedures do you have and which ones you don't have that you would probably need in order to have a functional storage area. So it's not focusing on all of your all of the policies and procedures for your institution. It's really focusing on the ones that will be more significant for functional storage management, so for accessing your collection and using it for your activities. Worksheet 6 is the collection analysis, and we did get a little sneak peek into that from Marjolaine's presentation. But basically what we're trying to discover here or to document is where is what. So where are which objects and how many are there? We're trying to look at, is it possible to regroup some of these objects that are of similar size and type together in order to optimize space? So sometimes they're scattered throughout different spaces in the institution. Some of them are in the hallways. Some of them are in the basement. Some of them are scattered across different rooms. So is it possible to regroup these in order to space and to promote a better access? And then what are my special objects? So are the objects with special legal restrictions or spiritual issues related to any of these objects? So we're trying to find what the different types of objects that you might have that might have special requirements that will have an impact on how you plan your space. So do you need a highly secure room for your extremely valuable objects, or do you have some firearms that you need special cabinets for? So we're trying to find all those objects that might have an impact on furniture that special furniture you might need to buy, or special rooms you might need to create. So that's number 6. And worksheet number 7 then focuses on the documentation system. So the goal here is how do I improve the trackability of my collection? So do I have all the elements in place to be able to retrieve my objects quickly? So we said under 3 minutes in the collection, in the criteria. So am I able to do this, and what parts of my system might be missing, and how can I improve them? Worksheet 8, we're looking at all the small equipment that you use to work with your collection. So do I have sufficient ladders to access my collections, or trays or carts to move my collection around? So we're just kind of looking at those key pieces of equipment that you might need, and some collections might require more specialized equipment, so we're also looking at those as well. And then worksheet 9 is the condition report template. So instead of just having you fill out all the worksheets and then leaving you to your own, leaving you on your own to kind of design your own report, we've prepared a template, and basically you only have to modify the template according to the information that you find. So it's already kind of designed as a report, and you modify it including all the data that you collected in those worksheets. So you're identifying, what are the key issues affecting your storage? What can we do to address them in the short term? And what do we need to be able to tackle this project in terms of people and money and equipment? And what benefit will this bring to our community or audience, which is something we highlighted, we're trying to highlight very strongly in this course. And it was mentioned also in the first webinar in the question period, where how do we sell this project to upper management? So we need to really be clear about that from the beginning. Now, that was the in-depth version. So in our courses here in Canada, most of our participants will have done an in-depth condition report, but really some of them don't find it useful to go into that much depth because they like to do things more intuitively. They like to do things visually. They're not numbers people necessarily, and so that's absolutely fine. And I want you to feel really comfortable and really to use the material and to adapt it to your own needs, because not everyone wants a detailed condition report or needs one. So, but some people really, really want that, and some people might need to report to their upper management, and it's a nice way to package all that information that you collected, and it's also good sometimes to have that as documentation of the project in years to come when perhaps you won't be working there anymore. They'll still have that condition report to document the process and your thinking process. So the second option, the light one, which I'm going to suggest that we focus on for this course, is the light version. So with the light version, we're going to be using the self-evaluation that you did for this second webinar, and I'd like to start the second poll right now and get a sense of what your scores were for each of those 4 sections. So if you can take a minute and just enter your scores for each of the 4 components. Going, but if you haven't entered all 4, then just please keep doing so. So how we're going to use it for this course is that basically when you filled out your self-evaluation, you attributed a score to each of the questions or statements. So we're going to use these indicated as an indication of the issues that you're facing. So basically, if question F1 you said that which was no object is placed directly in the floor, and you responded 4, a few objects are placed directly in the floor. So one of your issues then is going to be that you have objects on the floor. So it's pretty simple and straightforward. So every time you didn't get a perfect score, you would then highlight that as an issue. And depending on, if it's only a couple of objects or it's most of your collection that is on the floor, then you can gauge then how important that problem is going to be. So I would just go through and we don't have to do this now, but you'll have to do this for your second assignment, is go through your self-evaluation and basically list all of your issues that you found in all of your 4 different components. So one way to present this would be the following. So I'd like for the second assignment for you to look at each of the 4 different components and to identify what your top 3 issues were, and then what 3 proposed actions to address each of those issues would be. So really try to do the issues. If you can try to do the proposed actions, that would be useful and helpful for you later on. But really try to tease out from your self-evaluation, try to keep it to only 3, the priority ones that you think are going to be affecting your collection more than the others. Okay? So that's how I would suggest you go through the condition report for this course. In terms of space planning, we may have different questions we want to answer, and reorg addresses really 3 issues, let's say. So reorg addresses how do I plan my storage layout is one thing that we're going to be trying to answer. How can I regroup my objects, and how many extra units do I need? So this is where I was saying that you might have some ceramics in one room and in another room and in the basement, and how do I regroup those? And after I've looked at, things that, how many extra units that might mean if I have objects that are on the floor, for example, or not in units. So how many extra units do I need for those objects? Okay. And then number 3 is how do I decompress my current units? So if I have a unit that is over 100% full, so let's say it's 200 or 300% full, how do I decompress that, and how many extra units do I need to accommodate that? Okay. So for the first part, how do I plan my storage layout? We're going to be using floor plans throughout reorg, and that's really, really one of the key, let's say, resources or tools that are really, really useful because it helps you visualize what your situation is and what you're planning to do, much more than photos. And how to regroup objects and how many extra units. We're going to be using worksheet 6 to do this, and I'm going to be going into a little bit of detail with that. But I will provide a visual option for those who are not numbers people, and how to decompress my current units. So also, there is a worksheet for this, but you can also do this visually. We have done it many times without using the worksheet. So I just want to indicate again and reinforce that you can use the method and adapt it to your own needs. Okay, so the first part is the floor plans. So if I were to show you these 2 photos, which are of the same storage areas, and this is a storage area that was in need of storage reorganization, it's really hard to see from photos what the overall situation is in storage, especially if you're not familiar with that space and if you're trying to communicate that to someone who perhaps has not been in your space. You will never have a photo that can fully capture the situation in a room. So this is why we find it very useful to use floor plans. So here in this floor plan is of the same space as those pictures that I just showed. You can see really where the storage furniture is. You can see where the collection is on the floor and the non-collection on the floor. So the green dots there are collection objects that are on the floor, and the red ones are non-collection items, so things that are not accessioned objects that are on the floor as well. And you can really see from a floor plan like this how difficult it is to access some of those aisles. There are so many objects on the ground that sometimes you cannot even go through an aisle. And it's really, really hard to show this with photos. But with a plan, it becomes very, very clear immediately what the issue is. So that's why we really focus on floor plans. So if you can do nothing else, then you really need to do your floor plans. This is a floor plan of just the storage furniture of the same space. So this is kind of the basic floor plan that you would start with, and this is a plan for the future expansion of the storage room. Okay, so there's different plans for different uses. So I'm going to go through all the different plans that are useful in a reorg project. So instructions on how to create your plans or suggestions on how you may create your plans are included in the workbook from pages 11 to 14 in the English version. And basically, on each page, you'll have an example of the floor plan using the same example that I'm using in this webcast. So the first floor plan that we're going to ask you to create is just the walls and the columns and the door and any windows. So it's basically just basic floor plan and the empty floor plan of the storage space. Then number 2 is what we call the fixtures plan. So this is where you would indicate if there's any pipes going over your collection, or where the lights are, where the switches are, the light switches, if there's any ducts or obstructions that are present. So this helps just in planning your layout afterwards to know where things are, if you need to avoid certain sources of risk or certain hazards that are present in your space. And here, also plan number 3 would be the storage furniture plan. So that's taking your first plan where you had only the walls, and you're adding in your current storage layout. So only the storage units that are in your space right now. Fourth plan would be taking that plan and then adding where all your non-collection items are on the floor and your collection items, and just kind of describing what your storage looks like before your reorg. So as I mentioned, you'll find instructions in the workbook from page 11 to 14 on how to create these plans. You might not need to go through the instructions. This might be clear enough for you to work, but there are some suggestions there on how you might create them. So floor plans, really, really useful. Second part then is for space planning. We're going to be talking about how to regroup objects and how many extra units do I need to accommodate objects that are what we call overflow objects, so objects that are not in units right now, objects that are on the floor. So you'll remember Marjolaine showing this nice Excel spreadsheet in her presentation. So this is what she was talking about in terms of regrouping collections of the same type together. So this is an example of that exercise. But what it looks like is when you look at worksheet 6, which is part of the reorg worksheets that are accompanying the workbook, it looks like this. And let us focus first on what we call the object categories. So I'm highlighting here one of the columns that's called object category. Okay, so this is where you would categorize your collection not according to object type. So we're not talking about paintings, sculptures, textiles, books. We're talking about what are the different categories that are defined by what you need to access the collection. So how you manipulate them, and what are the different requirements in terms of handling and size and need for special equipment. So I'll just go through the categories, and it will become very clear, I think, by the end. So when we said in the 10 reorg quality criteria that objects are arranged by category, this is what we're referring to here when we're talking about the categories. But there's nothing that prevents you from organizing your collection by type and then by category. So, for example, in Marjolaine's example, we had all the collections grouped by type. So we had paintings, paper, stone, ceramics, toys, puppets and theater, metal. So we're organizing them by type, but within those categories, we're organizing them by size. So here you see the ceramics are kind of grouped by size within the ceramics category. So we have like ceramics that are taller grouped together, the smaller ones grouped together, so you can really adapt the shelf height. And here you have puppets or dolls that are grouped by size. So it's not that you need to just forget that they're dolls and ceramics and just group everything by size. You can group them by type, obviously, and then within those types by size. And the reason for that will be various curatorial requirements. Collections of toys might be under the responsibility of one curator, and the ceramics might be in the responsibility of another curator. So there's various reasons why you might want to group things by type. Also, if you're planning exhibitions, and it's sometimes easier to have all the similar collections together. And so that is definitely possible. I just wanted to emphasize that. The different object categories that I'll be going through right now are actually found in the additional resources package, and it's resource number 10. So the resource number 10 goes through all the categories that I'm going to be showing you right now and describes them, and then describes some storage tips for each category. So you can definitely go through that afterwards. 12 object categories are the following, one at a time. We'll understand what we mean in terms of storage requirements and handling requirements. So the first category is extra heavy or voluminous objects that are difficult to manipulate. So here we're looking at whether it's a crate or a large statue. It's all the objects that are very, very heavy and difficult to manipulate that might need some special equipment to manipulate. Okay. The category number 2, we're looking at all the extra long objects that are not self-supporting, so that don't stand on their own. They need to be somehow on a shelf or tied to some vertical surface. So things that are quite long, so 6 feet, about 6 feet. But you can create your own size categories, but the idea is to really focus in on the ones that are longer. Category number 3 would be the very heavy objects that are self-supporting, so that they have their own, they stand on their own, and they require 2 people to manipulate them. So 70 pounds, 30 kilograms. So number 4 is all the long objects that are not self-supporting. So these are your spears, your canes, your paddles, all the agricultural type implements, rakes, things like that. So, but not extra long, so 2 meters, 7 feet. So long objects, not self-supporting. So you can see that as we go through this list is the things that we're grouping together in these categories, we are actually have a similar storage solution for them. And so that's kind of also what we're thinking about when we're thinking about categories, is how will they be stored afterwards? And so all of these have similar solutions that could be implemented. Number 5, we're talking about heavy objects that are self-supporting and that can be carried by one person using equipment. So maybe it's a cart or a trolley for objects that are not, or they're heavy, but they're not extra heavy. 6 is all the light self-supporting objects that can be carried by one person with 2 hands. So small sculptures, masks are examples of this. So you need 2 hands and carried by one person. They're a bit lighter. Number 7, have small objects that could be held in one hand. So we have examples here with glasses or pens or things that don't necessarily need. Always handle things with 2 hands. They don't necessarily, they're small enough that they can fit in one hand, let's say. 8, we have the 3-dimensional textile. So 3-dimensional textile is a bit of an odd term, but we're thinking about everything that needs to be hung or puppets or things like that. So textiles that are not necessarily flat as a rug would be, but things that need to keep a certain shape, okay? Number 9 are things that objects that should be stored flat. So we're thinking of all our maps and some textiles that may require, that are particularly fragile, that may require flat storage, prints, photos, things like that. Oops. Number 10 are objects that can be rolled. So textiles usually are in this category. Sometimes maps are stored rolled as well. 11, we have all these small 2-dimensional objects. So 2-dimensional, we mean usually framed things, paintings, or frames, but the smaller ones. So under 50 centimeters or 1.5 feet. So the smaller ones that could potentially fit on shelves as shown in this image. Number 12 is the last category, and here we're talking about all the large two-dimensional objects, so over 50 centimeters, over 1.5 feet, so large paintings, large frames. Okay? So if we only have 12 categories, then it becomes easier for us to start counting how many we have of each category and determine within one unit how many we have of each. So what I'm highlighting here, this yellow square, is showing inside one storage room have units. So each of the letters that you're seeing here, A, B, F, L, M, N, O, P, Q. So this is, you would use your own unit identification system. This is only an example, but you would have all your different units, and in each unit you would count how many small 2D objects you have. So in Unit A you have 1, in Unit B you have 10, in Unit L you have 2, and so on and so forth. So these are all the objects in that storage room. So here in this example, it's the art storage. Inside units, you would have objects, and then not inside unit. So on the floor, possibly, or leaning against a wall, or in the hallway or something, you would have these objects. Okay? So you're really making a quick inventory based on the category types of what is inside units right now and what is not inside units. Okay? And then you would add these up at the bottom. Okay? So you know that in this storage area you have 25 objects that are not inside a unit. They are of these different types. Of these totals in each. Okay? Now, outside storage. So this is, let's say, all the objects that are not on display, but that might be in an attic, in a basement, in an office of someone. So these are all the objects of different types that are outside storage. So here you would have, let's say, one large 2D. So there's a painting that's currently in the director's office. There's 3 sculptures that are in the basement. So this is kind of an idea. That means that there are 4 objects that are outside storage at the moment. Total number of objects. So here we're adding all the ones by type that are in a unit. That means that if I add all the paintings that are in all of these separate units in my storage room, I have 20, and I currently don't have any that are not in a unit. Okay? There's no paintings that are not in a unit, therefore there's nothing in this column because this is the totals. For the large 2D, so let's say large paintings, of 0 that are in a unit at the moment. All my inside units, no paintings. However, I do have 8 are not in a unit, but inside my storage room, so on the floor, let's say. And I have 1 that is outside of storage. So we said that painting was probably in the director's office. It means that I have a total of 9 units that are not storage, not in a unit, sorry. That means that if I add all of these up at the bottom here, I have 29 things that are not in a unit. So depending on whether or not I have room in my units to accommodate them, I may need to find a storage solution for these objects. I may need some extra units for these objects. So that's how this worksheet helps you understand how many extra units I need. Okay? So we're looking at how to regroup objects. So let's say I have, in Unit A, I have a small 2D. In Unit B, I have 10. In Unit L, I have 2. In Unit O, I have 6. In Unit Q, I have 1. Why don't I try to regroup these in my reorg into the same unit? Okay? So this is indicating that there may be opportunities here to regroup the objects better in order to use the space more efficiently. This is showing us how to regroup the objects, and then how many units. Basically, you're looking at what is currently not in a unit. And that's telling you that you need units for all of these different things if they don't fit in the current units. Now, this is a lot to process, so please feel free to go through this recording afterwards to re-listen to this explanation. It's hard at the moment to get feedback from you if you're following me or not, but I will point you towards the page 21 in the workbook. Shows in detail how to fill out this form and how to analyze your collection. So there is a step-by-step instruction in the workbook that shows, that describes what I just explained, okay? So worksheet 6B, so we just saw 6A. 6A was for within one storage area. So you would have one 6A for your first storage area, you would have another 6A for your other storage area. Let's say you have 2 storage areas, you would have 2 worksheet 6A. Now for 6B is where you're going to summarize all that information into one worksheet. So again, you have the same categories, but this is a summary of all of your storage areas. So inside all of your storage rooms, so you have your art storage, you have your archival storage, you have your other storage. So you're going to count all of the objects of different types that are in a unit, all the objects according to the different types that are not in a unit, and you're going to do that for every single storage room, okay? So that's how you compile all the findings from worksheet 6A into worksheet 6B. Now, same thing goes for the objects that are outside storage rooms. Count the totals from the first worksheets and add them up and include them here. And you also have the same principle here. So you're adding up all the things that are in a unit and things that are not in a unit. So you know that overall in your museum, in your art gallery, or whatever institution you're working in, you have 3,075 objects that are in a unit, and you have 804 objects that are not in a unit. So these will eventually need to be addressed. Okay? So this is the purpose of this form. The worksheet 6 is how to regroup my objects and how many extra units do I need. Hope you're following me. We're going to move on to worksheet 4, which is answering the question, how to decompress my current units. Worksheet 4, what it looks like. In the first column here on the left, you're seeing different types of units. So I'm not sure if you can read it, but I'm going to read it for you. So the top column here, the top row, I should say, the top section, is looking at drawer cabinets. So chest of drawers. The second one is open shelves. Then I have cupboards. These are racks, and these are pallets. So you would basically fill this form out according to the different unit types that you have in your storage areas. And so you would focus here on understanding what the storage surface you have. So how many square feet or square meters do I have of storage space in my room right now? Forgetting that you have anything on them. We want to calculate this as if all those units were empty, so there was no collections in them. We just want to calculate how much shelving space do you have, or how much rack space. Okay? And so basically to do this, if I take my first unit A, I would write down the height, the length, the depth, and then here I would multiply the length and the depth to understand what the unit footprint is. So how much space does that unit occupy on the floor? Okay, so what's the footprint of that unit? And then depending on how many shelves there are in that unit, if I'm talking about, or here I'm talking about drawer cabinets. So if there are 7 drawers in this cabinet, then I would write 7 here. And by multiplying the number of surfaces I have in that unit by the unit footprint, I get an idea of how much storage surface that unit offers. So if I have 7 drawers and each drawer is 0.8 square meters, if I multiply this 0.8 square meters by 7, then I end up with 5.6, which tells me how much storage surface I have in that unit. Now, the other column here is looking at, well, this is nice, so 5.6 square meters. That's assuming that there's nothing in my unit. How full is this unit? So how filled with collections is it currently? So here in this example, I see that this first unit is filled to 100%. The second unit is filled to 200%, so it's over full. This one is filled to 150%. How did we arrive at this percentage? So this is what we're going to do right now. I'm going to focus on the unit fullness. Unit fullness is the amount of space expressed as a percentage occupied by objects in a unit. And we're assuming that the 2-object rule is respected. The 2-object rule, as you'll remember, is number 6 in the reorg criteria, where we said that every object can be accessed without moving more than 2 others. How to decompress my current units. So we're going to start the 3rd poll right now, and I want you to think about, if you look at this image, how full would you say that it is? Choice, and you just choose instinctively how full you think this unit is. People are saying full, some people are saying like really almost full, and some people are saying almost half full. Okay, so those are answers that I expect to hear, so let's go through it for this specific unit. So here, if I look at the types of objects that are in here and the category that they belong to, so these are small objects that can fit in one hand, I could probably add an extra shelf in here. I could probably add an extra shelf in here. So that means that instead of having 3 shelves, I now have 5. So if I'm going to determine how full my unit is, I would just divide 3 by 5, because I have 3 units that are currently full and 2 units that are empty. So 3 units that are full divided by 5 equals 60%. So that's a quick way of determining, assessing, guesstimating how full a unit is. I didn't say that you could add extra shelves, so that wasn't very fair on my part, but keep that in mind for the next example. So let's start the 4th poll now, and I want you to tell me how full you think this unit is. We do have a majority who chose 90, which is very great, very good. So 90, and why do we say 90? Oops, why do we say 90? We say 90 because there might be some room to add a few more objects here on this shelf at the bottom. So we know it's almost full. It's not 100% full, although that could be argued. Some people have said, oh, this is way too full. We need to decompress this shelf. But more or less, we know that it's not, there might be still a little bit of room in the shelving unit, but not that much, so about 90%. And it's surprising how, even though you might be 5%, 10% off, when in the grand scheme of things, people do have an instinctive, once they've done a few units, they then start to have the same results regardless of what their assumptions are. How to decompress my current units. We're going to start number 6 now, the poll number 6. So I want to know from you how full you think this unit is that we're seeing. I think this is the wrong poll.
This is the wrong poll. This is poll number 5. Hang on a second here.
Okay,
everyone, go ahead.
Trick question. Okay, so this is poll number 6 for this slide. Everyone is converging, I can tell, to 95, although there's some people who feel that 75 might be better. And I'm going to say 95, and this is the thinking behind this this number is that if you count the number of compartments in this slide, so you have let's see, make sure you have 6 compartments here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 vertically, and you have 4 horizontally, so that makes 24 compartments. And they're mostly all have objects in them, or they're full except for this one, which doesn't have anything in it. And so you could say that if you divide 23 by 24, that's about 95% full. But I think the exact number is not the point here, is that you really see that you really couldn't add that many more objects in here. And obviously, when you're in front of a real storage unit, it's a lot easier to guesstimate than from a picture. So we start poll number 6. Here, I'm going to say that you could probably add some shelving in here in order to fit more things in. Some of you might say, well, we should put this really in drawers. It would be more appropriate for this type of object, and you wouldn't be wrong. But in this specific case, in this cabinet, we could probably add another 5 shelves, making this unit full to about 50%. So you see how we're working here in terms of determining the fullness. We're imagining the unit in a reorganized state. So we're trying to picture forward how we would store it in that unit to tell us how full that unit is. So this percentage of fullness assumes that we're going to be adding 5 more shelves in here. Okay, so this is how this then helps us to determine how much more storage surface we need for our collection. Poll number 7 now. So this is another type of unit. General consensus on the fact that this unit is overfull, so we're over 100%. And here, if we added another shelf in here, which there's room for, we could probably decompress those shelves, that top shelf, and probably make the top shelf 100% full because there's so much stuff in that top shelf that even if we were to add an extra shelf, the top shelf would probably be already full. And probably the second shelf would also be full at that point. If we're respecting the two-object rule, then probably the third shelf is over full as well. So we're going to say that's about 200% full. Like you would need two more, you would need another shelf in order to decompress that as well. And I'm going to say the same thing for that shelf and the same thing for that shelf. So if I do an average of all of these percentages, I end up with 160%. So congratulations to those who said, to the 45 of you who said 160%. And just basic arithmetic here, if we're doing an average, we're basically adding up all the different percentages and dividing it by the number of percentages that we had. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we add all of these up, divide by 5, and we end up with 160. So it's just an average unit fullness that we're ending up here. So there's a way of doing this very methodically, but once you've done, and I swear, once you've done a few units, you've done 3 or 4, you'll be able to eyeball it very, very fast and guesstimate without necessarily needing to calculate this. You'll be able to estimate, oh, is this 60% full, 25% full, 100, 200? You'll start to get the hang of it as you do. I'm going to say on your 4th or 5th unit, you'll get a really, really good estimation. Now, saving space have big consequences. So here, if we look at this example here, and we see that on each shelf, we're losing about 25% of the shelf space, of the shelf height, just because the unit was assembled before the containers were put on there, and so they were assembled at a regular interval without really considering what would be going inside them. And so this happens in many cases where there's a little bit of space wasted on each shelf. So 25% on each shelf means that the whole entire shelf is wasted in the end. So you could have room to have a whole other row of these containers on it. Another example that shows how space waste can add up very quickly is this one. So here, if I look at this one bay in front of us, I can see that there's about, as well, like 25% wasted on each of those shelves. So there is one shelf. That means that I'm wasting about one shelf per bay. So a bay is like a one side of that aisle, one section of storage shelving. So I'm wasting one full shelf for each bay. I have 4 bays per run of shelving. A run is a kind of an aisle, like a complete back-to-back aisle of shelving. So I have 4 bays per run. I have 8 runs that I'm seeing in this example. That means that if I were to adapt the shelving to the size of these containers, of these boxes, I could save 32 shelves. What does 32 shelves mean? It means 2 complete runs that I would save. So you can see how it doesn't look like a lot of space is being wasted on one shelf, but it really, really quickly adds up depending on how many units you have. So it seems like there's not a lot of space being wasted, but it actually really adds up quickly. And just a terminology alert, where I'm getting this terminology from, there is this European standard that came out that basically defines all the different components of shelving. I just wanted to point out where I was taking all these terms from. So that's that. Okay, so how to decompress my current units. We looked at the fullness and how that is determined for each of the different units that you would have that are drawer cabinets. So then you would add up the fullness. Sorry, you would do an average of the fullness here, and you would add up all the storage surface that is offered in all of your drawer cabinets. So I know here that I have 86 or 66.6 square meters of storage surface for these drawers, and overall my drawers are 109% full, so they're over full. So if I look a little bit closer, if I multiply my 66.6 meters square of drawer space by 9%, which is actually how much I'm exceeding the fullness. So I'm 9% over full here. That means that 6 meters square is needed extra to store this collection adequately. Okay? So for you who are working in feet, 66.6 meters is 710 square feet. I'm 9% over, and so that means that I need 64 square feet of extra shelf space to accommodate those objects based on the unit fullness study that I did. Okay? Floor plans, we absolutely need them. I think it's a very important tool that you'll be using for your whole project, regardless if you're doing an in-depth study or just a visual study. But I will say that you can do Worksheet 6 and Worksheet 4 as a visual estimation. And we have done this in the workshops that we've done. And so how do you do this? Well, when you are actually removing objects from your storage area and into your swing space, you will probably be grouping them according to type and size. So you will be sort of grouping them according to those 12 categories anyways. You'll be putting those large objects all together, all your furniture pieces together, all your canes and spears and skis and all the different long and thin objects together. So there's a way that you can actually physically group them in your swing space. And by doing that, you'll be able to estimate how many you have and how much storage space you'll need to store them. So in the context of a workshop or a project where you have time to really focus on in this way, and you're not so great with numbers, you by regrouping them into the space physically, you're able to estimate instead of actually counting things. The same thing here in this example. We grouped all the frames of similar sizes together, so by default, you'll be grouping them together of similar sizes. So based on your groupings, you'll be able to see how many frames of which size do you have and how much storage space you need to store them. Many groups have worked in this way without necessarily counting every single object. Where it becomes more useful to count every single object is when you have large groups, like 30 people working together at the same time. Then it becomes a little bit impossible to just do it visually. And depending on the size of the storage as well, if it's a large storage area, if you have 10 storage areas that you're working on together, like some of the international courses, then it's almost necessary to count every single object. But often, visual estimation is good enough. So here you see an example where we actually group them together, group the objects of similar sizes together on templates that we cut out of the same sizes of our shelving. So we knew that we needed, when we brought them into the swing space, we knew that we needed how many shelves we needed for what height of object. So the objects that were, let's say, a foot high, 30 centimeters high, we needed 2 shelves to store them. And these ones that are a bit larger, we needed 2 shelves for those as well. So the way that when you bring objects into your swing space, that's when you can start regrouping them and estimating how much storage shelving space you need. Just a different approach. There's not one is better than the other. In terms of how many extra units we need, now if we're going to be focusing on visual estimations, what we've learned is that when you're in how am I going to say how many units I need? I don't really know how to do that. Math. So fill the floor. So in this example, we see the unit. Squares are about 30 floor space. When in doubt, floor space 50. That's used to have access to class. Okay. So is good enough estimate. It could be 45, 50, 55. You know what your access requirement and how big your cart to get through the aisle. 50%. This is why we call it the 50% rule. So if you count your unit footprint and you see that you have less than 50%, then that means that you could probably fit more units into your space. If you have over 50% of the floor space that you're using with units, then there's likely no more floor space, and perhaps you're using too much of it. So maybe there are access problems and it's a bit too tight in there. General indication. You'll remember from Marjoleine's presentation where she mentioned this 30% diagnostic for her storage areas, and she said that actually there's still space to add more units because we can go up to 45. So 45, 50, more or less.
Simon, can you go back and repeat how to measure the floor space? There was an issue with the audio where it started to drop out a little bit in and out, and it's been fixed now.
Okay. So at this point, okay. So the floor space, when in doubt, what we're saying is when you're just trying to determine how many extra units you need, sometimes it's hard to do that because you're not quite sure, you're not a math person. So what we're saying is that from experience we've learned that when you're in doubt of how many extra units you need, just fill the floor space as much as you can to access your collection safely. So in this example, you're seeing a floor space that's filled to about 30% with units, but actually you could go up to 50, probably 45, 50, 55, around that area. And this is what we call the 50% rule. So, which means that if you calculate your unit footprint and you notice that you end up with less than 50%, that means that you can probably fit more units in there. If you end up with over 50%, that means there's probably no more floor space and you're too tight. So you might need to remove some units, or you might just be at capacity. And as I mentioned, this is in Marjoleine's presentation, she mentioned that they found that they were occupying the floor space to 30%. So if you look at the 50% rule, that means that there is still some room to add more units, which is what they did. And this is Marjoleine's group that started from this 30% floor space usage, and then they applied the 50% rule in there while they were developing their layout proposal. And we'll go into detail for phase 3 for this. You might wonder why 50%. So 50% is basically what you can expect more or less if you have cabinets, open shelves, or drawers. And it's, you see 35 if you have objects that are larger or heavier that need 2 people to handle them. So you might need aisles that are a bit wider. So it's just an indication, this 50%. It's not a hard rule. If you have open shelves, you have one person, these objects that can be handled by one person or by 2 people. So with one person, usually 45, 50. With 2 people, 35% is a good rule. But it always depends on the actual situation in the room. Same thing for cabinets. Less drawers, you do need a little bit more floor space because you need to be able to open your drawers. So if you have only drawers in your space, you can expect to be able to use about 60%. Pallets, you often need specialized equipment to access. So if there are only pallets in your space, you could probably use only 25% of the floor space. Sliding racks, you could either use 50% because you need space to be able to open your rack, or you could also use 66% if you have a configuration like this where you're using that aisle space twice for both sides. Compact shelving, instead of having a maximum of 45% as you would with fixed shelving, you're actually able to use the space more efficiently, and we're saying about 80% because you're using that aisle space many, many times, and so you're able to really use more of the floor space. So the condition report light, the first part, the summary, okay? The first part is highlighting the main issues. So you're using your storage self-assessment to identify what your key issues are. And then you're producing your 4 floor plans. So the floor plan with the walls, the floor plans with the furniture, floor plans with the fixtures, and then the floor plans with the collections and non-collections on the floor to indicate what this current situation in storage is. Now for the floor space occupation, do you have less, are you using your space less than 50% of your space? Are you using more than 50% of your space? Can I optimize floor space? You'll have to answer. Just a reminder, if you want to know how to calculate your unit footprint, basically you calculate the dimensions of each storage unit and you add them up together and you divide by the total area of the storage area. And that will tell you the percentage of space occupation, floor space occupation. Now, objects arranged by category. What are some signs that you may need to focus on space issues when you do your self-evaluation? Well, first of all, if you identify that objects are not arranged by category, that might be an indication that you need to focus on space optimization. If you said that your storage aisles are not wide enough to move objects safely, you may need to focus on space. If you said that objects can be retrieved with limited handling of other objects, if that's not the case, then you may need to focus on space issues. If objects are placed directly on the floor, you might be also focusing on space. If there is sufficient space, there is not sufficient space in existing storage units to accommodate new acquisitions, then you also may need to focus on space. So these are kind of triggers, signs that you may need to do a space, you may need to focus on space as part of your condition report. Your units are not suitable for the types of and dimensions of objects, then you may need to focus a little bit on space. Can I optimize space? So, is it possible to optimize space in your storage area? So the first question, do your units occupy at least 50% of the floor space? If you do not, then you may be able to gain some more floor space. Can I better group objects by category? By using the full usable height of the room. So here on the bottom left here, you're seeing a situation where there's a duct, a ventilation duct, so I cannot go right up to the ceiling with my unit. So I'm probably using about 100% of that vertical space in this situation. But sometimes if you didn't have this duct, there are examples where units are not necessarily using the full height, then you may be able to use that height more efficiently. That's another question to ask yourself to see if you can optimize space. Am I using vertical surfaces? So am I using the end of aisles? Am I using end of aisles? Am I using the end of my storage units aisles as well? So all the vertical spaces that I have sometimes can be used for those long, thin objects that we mentioned. Are my shelves spaced according to object size? So am I adapting the shelf height based on the size and height of my objects? If I'm not doing that, then I might be able to optimize space further. Am I using the right type of storage system? So here, as I mentioned, someone might prefer to store these in boxes or in drawer cabinets. So is there a way that I could store these more in a different type of unit to optimize space? Here I see an example of long and thin objects that are being stored on this pegboard, where previously they were stored on shelves. So if they're stored on shelves, they're wasting a lot of that height on the shelves. So this is a way to more efficiently store them. Brings us to the end of the second webinar. So what I'm going to ask you to do for the next webinar, which is April 10th, is to do these 4 things. So first of all, as I mentioned, you'll need to list your top 3 issues for management, building, collection, and furniture. So you can do a little table, or you can put it in a list form. I'm going to ask you also to draw those 4 floor plans. So the empty floor plan, the floor plan with fixtures, the floor plan with furniture, and the floor plan with collections on the floor. I'm also going to ask you to calculate your floor space occupations. So that's basically are you the percentage? So are you 30%, are you 50%, are you 60%? So just calculate your floor space occupations, and then I want you to list 2 things that you could do to optimize space in your storage area. Because of the way that our system, our learning management system works, I would ask you to put all of this into one single Word document. So if you're going to be putting floor plans in there, you can draw them by hand, but take a picture with your phone or your camera and just paste them into that Word document and make sure that you compress the images using the Word compress images function in order for the size of that document to not be too big to be able to upload it. The assignment is described in a little bit more detail in the actual assignment section of the learning platform. So I'm going to invite you to take a look at that as well. So this brings me to the end of this session. I know that I'm a little bit over, and so any questions that I'm not able to answer right now, I will answer in the discussion for you. So don't worry if you have a question and I'm not able to answer it right now. I will answer it as soon as possible in the discussion.
Yeah, this is Susan. I think there are quite a few questions, and we can just post those in the discussion because we only have 2 more minutes. But there was a long discussion about someone who had a large box full of textiles on the floor. Is it a unit? Is it an object? It's heavy. And so how would you do that?
So without having seen specific situation, what I tell participants to do is to try to imagine what those collections would look like if they were stored in the system that you envision for them. So if these are textiles that are piled in a cardboard box that are not stored optimally, and you would like to store them rolled, for example, or folded in boxes, so I'd like you to imagine all those objects that are currently on the floor into a unit. And so imagine that unit was in your storage area. So you always have to kind of look forward when you're trying to figure out the storage fullness, and to imagine how it would be, how much floor space it would occupy if it was stored optimally. So if you had a box full of textiles, would that require a rolled storage unit, and how much space would that occupy, and how full would it be if you imagine those textiles in there? So it's a bit of a hard thing to do initially, but once you've done a few of these units, then people usually get the hang of it pretty quickly.
Okay. Let's see. There was a discussion about different types of software that people might use for doing floor plans. Do you have any suggestions about that, or is drawing out a floor plan?
Yes, there's a list of free software tools that are available online that can be used for this purpose, and that list is actually in the reorg workbook in the Phase 2 resources section. There's a list of all the different tools that are there that you can use. Some people really like using PowerPoint as a way of doing their floor plans. It's just a simple thing that a lot of people have on their computers. But there's also some online space planning tools like Floor Planner, which is a free tool that you can use and that allows you to do a 3-dimensional model as well of your space. So that's a nice tool that's available for free. But I can put that list up in the discussion maybe.
Yeah, or give it to me and I'll post it as a handout. Okay, so Berlin Loa asked, where do you submit assignments? To submit the assignments, to find the handouts, you need to go to the Elevate site. So the site that you log into to get to the webinars, the recordings, all that stuff is there. And I post all of the websites that are mentioned in the webinar. They're all there in a section called Handouts, which you need to open. So that's where they are. And the handouts that are here today will also get posted there. And the assignment is under assignments in that website. Okay? So we will see you in 2 weeks. And in the meantime, remember, if you have problems with passwords, that kind of stuff, contact info, the info address. If you have problems with the interface, contact me, and then put in discussions things into the discussions.
I'll be monitoring the discussions. So if you run into issues, I'll be trying to answer your questions as you're trying to work through it. Okay?
Yeah. Okay. So thank you all, and thank you, Mike. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Everyone.